My name is Sarah, and I'm 37 years old. If you asked my family to describe me, they'd probably use words like reliable, steady, maybe even predictable. Not the exciting adjectives you dream about as a little girl, but somewhere along the way, I became the person everyone could count on, the one who remembered appointments, kept track of birthdays, and always had tissues in her purse. I work as an accountant at a mid-sized firm in Denver, live in a cozy one-bedroom apartment with too many houseplants, and I've perfected the art of being invisibly essential. My family is one of those big, boisterous clans that looks perfect in Christmas card photos. We're the kind of people who post heartwarming reunion pictures on social media with captions about blessed and family first, while carefully cropping out the tensions simmering just below the surface. My parents, Robert and Linda, have been married for 42 years and live in the same colonial-style house where my brother Jake and I grew up. They're the type who keep plastic on the good furniture and have strong opinions about everything from how to properly load a dishwasher to which political candidate deserves their vote. Jake, my younger brother by 3 years, has always been what my mother calls a free spirit, though I've noticed that's usually code for someone who never quite grew up. He's 34 now, with the same boyish grin that got him out of trouble in high school and the same casual disregard for consequences that got him into it. While I was studying for the CPA exam, he was backpacking through Europe on money he'd borrowed from our parents. While I was working 60-hour weeks to establish my career, he was pursuing his passion for artisanal coffee roasting, a venture that lasted exactly 4 months before he moved on to craft beer brewing, then sustainable farming, then cryptocurrency trading. Growing up, the differences between us were already apparent. Jake was the golden child who could do no wrong, even when he literally did wrong. I remember being 16 and getting grounded for coming home 15 minutes past curfew after a school dance. That same weekend, Jake, then 13, snuck out his bedroom window to meet friends at the park and wasn't discovered until the police brought him home at 2 in the morning. My punishment stood. His was dismissed with "boys will be boys" and an affectionate hair ruffle from Dad. I learned early that my role in the family ecosystem was to be the responsible one, the one who didn't cause problems or create drama. When Jake needed money for his latest venture, I was the one who quietly covered our parents' mortgage payment that month so they could afford to help him. When Mom's car needed repairs, I handled it without being asked. When Dad's hours at the hardware store were cut back, I increased my monthly contribution without mentioning it. I told myself it was what family did for each other, even though I noticed the flow of support only seemed to move in one direction. The dynamic crystallized during what should have been one of my proudest moments. I'd just been promoted to senior accountant, the youngest person in my firm's history to reach that level. I'd worked myself to exhaustion for it, sacrificing weekends, social life, even a relationship that might have gone somewhere if I'd had time to nurture it. When I called my parents to share the news, my mother's response was, "Oh, that's nice, honey. Jake just told us he's thinking about going back to school for his MBA. Isn't that wonderful?" I sat in my office, still holding the phone, staring at the nameplate that had just been delivered for my new desk, and felt something inside me crack just a little. Not break, not shatter, just a small fissure that would grow wider with each passing year, each overlooked achievement. Each time my contributions were taken for granted while Jake's potential was celebrated. But I pushed it down, the way I always did. I showed up for Sunday dinners, bringing wine and dessert. I attended Jake's gallery opening when he decided he was a photographer, buying one of his overpriced prints that still sits in my closet. I helped plan my parents' 40th anniversary party, handling all the details while Jake showed up an hour late with his latest girlfriend and took credit for the slideshow I'd spent weeks assembling. Through it all, I maintained my smile, my reliability, my place in the family structure. I was the foundation, solid and unnoticed, until something needed support. And I told myself I was okay with that being needed was its own form of love, even if it wasn't the kind that came with recognition or gratitude. That delicate balance I'd maintained for years finally shattered on a crisp October evening. The catalyst was Jake's engagement to Madison, an influencer with a perfectly curated Instagram feed and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I'd met her a handful of times, and each interaction left me feeling like I'd been assessed and found wanting. She had this way of looking at my sensible heels and department store dresses with barely concealed pity, as if my choice to prioritize financial stability over fashion was a personal failing. My mother, naturally, adored her. From the moment Jake introduced Madison at Easter dinner, Mom was smitten. "She's just perfect for our Jake," she gushed to anyone who would listen. "Such style, such grace. She's going to elevate him." Wanted to ask what exactly Jake needed elevating from, but I knew better than to puncture my mother's carefully constructed narrative. The engagement happened in typical Jake fashion. An elaborate proposal at a trendy rooftop bar that he definitely couldn't afford, complete with a photographer to capture every moment for Madison's social media. The ring was enormous, the kind of ostentatious display that screamed debt rather than devotion. But no one seemed concerned about practicalities like how he'd paid for it or whether he could afford the lifestyle Madison clearly expected. 3 weeks after the proposal, I received a call from my mother. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was just getting home from work, juggling grocery bags and my laptop while trying to unlock my door. "Sarah, sweetheart." Her voice had that particular tone that always preceded a request. "We need to talk about Jake and Madison's engagement party." I set my bags on the counter, already knowing where this was heading. "What about it?" "Well, we want to do something really special for them. You know how important first impressions are, and Madison's family is very well connected. Her father owns several restaurants in Aspen." I unpacked my groceries methodically, putting each item in its designated spot. "And we were thinking of having it at the Sterling Room. You know, that beautiful private dining space downtown? The one with the city views?" I did know it. I'd attended a colleague's wedding reception there last year. "The venue alone cost more than many people's entire wedding budgets. That's quite upscale, Mom." "Well, that's the thing, sweetie." Her voice became even more honeyed. "We were hoping you could help with the arrangements. You're so good at these things, so organized. And maybe, if it's not too much trouble, you could put down the deposit? Just to hold the space. We'll pay you back once we sort out the finances." There it was, the familiar request dressed up as a compliment. I closed my eyes, leaning against my kitchen counter. "How much is the deposit?" "Just 3,000. But think of it as an investment in your brother's happiness. $3,000. Just. As if it were pocket change rather than months of careful saving. I wanted to say no, to finally draw a line, but the guilt was already creeping in. The voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother whispered about family obligations and sisterly duty. "I'll take care of it," I heard myself say. "Oh, Sarah, you're such a blessing. I knew we could count on you." The relief in her voice was palpable. "And of course, you'll be there early to help set up? You know Jake isn't good with details." "Of course!" The words came out automatically, a lifetime of conditioning overriding my exhaustion. I handled everything, just as I always did. I negotiated with the venue, selected the menu, coordinated with the florist, managed the guest list. I spent hours on the phone with vendors, used my lunch breaks to review contracts, and my evenings to address invitations. Madison occasionally texted me her opinions, always criticisms, never gratitude. "The flowers need to be more blush, less pink. The font on the invitations is too traditional. Can't you find a better caterer?" Jake's contribution consisted of showing up to the cake tasting, where he spent the entire time on his phone, occasionally looking up to nod at whatever Madison selected. When I mentioned the mounting cost, he waved me off with a vague promise to pay me back once his latest investment paid off. I didn't ask what investment, I'd learned not to. The night of the engagement party arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt like a personal insult to my growing anxiety. I'd been at the venue since 4 in the afternoon, overseeing the setup, managing the staff, ensuring every detail met Madison's exacting standards. I'd changed in the bathroom, trading my practical flats for heels that already hurt, applying makeup in the harsh fluorescent lighting while the catering staff rushed past. By the time the guests began arriving at 7, everything was perfect. The Sterling Room glowed with soft candlelight, elaborate floral arrangements graced every surface, and a jazz quartet played softly in the corner. I'd even arranged for Madison's favorite champagne to be served, a detail that had required calling in a favor from a distributor. I watched from the entrance as the space filled with Madison's friends, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Jake's college buddies clustered near the bar, already well on their way to drunk. My parents held court near the windows, my mother resplendent in a new dress that probably cost more than she'd ever spent on my birthday presents combined. I smoothed my hands over my own dress, a simple navy sheath I'd worn to several events before. It was appropriate, professional, forgettable, everything I'd been trained to be. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the party I'd spent weeks organizing. The first person I encountered was Madison's mother, a severe woman who looked like she sustained herself entirely on green juice and disapproval. She glanced at me with the kind of smile that didn't involve any actual muscle movement. "Oh, you must be the sister. Madison mentioned you have been helping with some of the arrangements." Some of the arrangements. I'd done everything, but I just smiled and nodded. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for them. How thoughtful! Her tone suggested she found it more pitiful than thoughtful. It must be nice to have so much free time. Before I could respond, she'd already moved on, air-kissing someone more worthy of her attention. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I'd been dismissed for my own efforts, then made my way toward where my family was gathered. As I approached, I heard Jake's laughter, loud and performative. He was regaling a group with some story. Madison draped on his arm like an expensive accessory. My parents flanked them, beaming with pride. It was a perfect family tableau, and I walked toward it with the same feeling I'd had at every school play, every graduation, every family photo. Like I was approaching something I was part of, but not included in. "Sarah!" My mother noticed me first, her smile brightening in that way that usually preceded a request. "There you are. Doesn't everything look wonderful?" "It's beautiful," I agreed, waiting for someone to acknowledge my role in creating it. "Madison planned every detail," Jake announced to the group. "She has such incredible taste. My girl knows how to throw a party." I felt the words hit me like small stones, each one chipping away at something inside me. Madison, who had contributed nothing but criticism, was receiving credit for my weeks of work. And Jake, who knew exactly who had done what, was perpetuating the lie with enthusiasm. "Actually," I started, but my mother cut me off. "Sarah, honey, could you check with the catering staff? I think we're running low on the salmon appetizers." Her dismissal was smooth, practiced, the kind of redirection she'd perfected over years of managing my inconvenient truths. I stood there for a moment, watching them return to their conversation, as if I'd already left. Madison was describing her vision for the wedding, how she wanted something intimate but luxurious, how her father had connections at the most exclusive venues. My mother hung on every word, occasionally shooting my father meaningful looks that probably translated to, "How are we going to afford this?" That's when I noticed the seating arrangements for dinner. The main table, a long rectangular beauty draped in ivory linens, was set for 16. Place cards in elegant calligraphy marked each spot. I walked closer, reading the names. Jake and Madison at the center, of course. My parents on one side, Madison's parents on the other. Her siblings, his college friends, her sorority sisters. I walked the entire length of the table twice, certain I'd missed my card. "Excuse me, I caught one of the servers. I think there might be a mistake with the place cards. I don't see my name." The young man looked uncomfortable. "Oh, you're Sarah?" Ms. Madison said to put you at the auxiliary table. He gestured toward a small round table in the corner, the kind they use for overflow at corporate events. It was set for 4, though only one place card sat on its surface. Mine. I stared at that solitary card, my name written in the same elegant script as all the others. But somehow it looked different, smaller, insignificant. The table itself was positioned just far enough from the main party to make conversation impossible, close enough that I'd have a perfect view of everyone else's togetherness. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "The auxiliary table? For vendor coordination," the server explained, clearly quoting what he'd been told. "Ms. Madison said you'd need to be available if any issues arose. Vendor coordination." I'd been categorized not as family, not even as a guest, but as staff. The hired help who'd been granted a seat as a courtesy. I looked back at the main table, where Jake was pulling out Madison's chair with exaggerated chivalry, where my mother was laughing at something Madison's father had said, where everyone seemed to be exactly where they belonged. Something inside me, that crack that had been widening for years, finally split wide open. But I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry or shout or demand recognition. Instead, I walked to my assigned table and sat down, placing my small clutch on the empty chair beside me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I finally had a table to myself, just not the way I'd imagined. The next 2 hours passed in a surreal blur. I sat at my lonely table, watching the party I'd organized unfold without me. The servers, perhaps recognizing one of their own, were kind. They brought me each course without my having to ask, kept my water glass filled, even snuck me an extra dessert. But their sympathy only highlighted my isolation. From my corner, I had a perfect view of the main table's dynamics. Jake held court, his stories growing louder and more embellished with each glass of wine. Madison picked at her food, occasionally showing her ring to catch the light, her smile never wavering even when Jake's hand gestures nearly knocked over her champagne. My mother kept touching Madison's arm, leaning in for intimate conversations that made them both giggle. My father looked slightly overwhelmed but pleased, the patriarch of a successfully launching child. No one looked for me. In 2 hours, not a single person from the main table glanced in my direction. I could have left, slipped out quietly, and I doubt anyone would have noticed until the bill came. But I stayed, some masochistic part of me needing to see this through, to fully understand where I stood in the hierarchy of their affections. The moment of reckoning came with dessert. The servers had just finished distributing the elaborate chocolate soufflés when the manager appeared, leather folder in hand. He paused at the main table, clearly looking for the host. There was a brief confusion before Jake pointed in my direction. "Oh, Sarah's handling all that," he called out, not even bothering to look at me. "She's got the card on file." The manager walked over to my table, professional smile in place. "Ms. Chen, the total for tonight's event comes to $8,432. Shall I process the card we have on file?" $8,000. My $3,000 deposit plus $5,000 more. For a party where I'd been seated at the reject table, credited with none of the planning, acknowledged by no one who mattered. I looked at the leather folder, then back at the main table where Jake was already back to his conversation, where Madison was posing for photos, where my parents were basking in the glow of their son's success. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there's been a misunderstanding." The manager's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry?" I stood up, smoothing my dress, taking my time. "I organized this event, yes. I paid the deposit, but I was told I'd be reimbursed before tonight. Since I'm apparently here as vendor coordination rather than family, I assume the hosts will be handling the final payment." The silence that followed was beautiful in its completeness. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head at the main table turned toward me, their expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. "Sarah!" My mother's voice carried across the space, sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing?" I picked up my clutch, held it carefully in front of me like a shield. "I'm clarifying my role here, Mom. According to the seating arrangement, I'm vendor coordination. Vendors don't typically pay for the events they're hired to manage." Jake's face had gone from confused to angry, the flush creeping up from his collar. "Are you seriously doing this right now? It's just the check. You always handle this stuff. I do, don't I?" I walked closer to their table, addressing the entire group now. I handled the venue booking, the catering selection, the flowers, the invitations. I handled it all while being told repeatedly that Madison planned every detail. So I'm confused about my role here. Am I family who contributed out of love? Or am I the hired help sitting at the overflow table? Madison found her voice, high and tight with indignation. "We thought you'd be more comfortable there. You're always so busy with work things." "Of course. How thoughtful of you to consider my comfort while relegating me to Siberia." I turned to the manager, who looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else. "The hosts are at the main table. I'm sure they'll sort out the payment." "This is ridiculous." Jake stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're really going to ruin my engagement party over a seating arrangement?" "No, Jake. I'm going to stop paying for parties where I'm not welcome. There's a difference." My mother had moved into crisis management mode, her voice taking on the soothing tone she used for difficult customers at the boutique where she worked part-time. "Sarah, let's not make a scene. We'll discuss this later. Just pay the bill and we'll sort it all out at home." but I was this cup just be. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Beyond the designer dress and perfect makeup, I saw someone who needed to push others down to feel tall. And I don't done being because I walked for the first like I'd to the Jake's, my mother was around. I sat at my wife, everything, my daughter, about a fam. He cleared after we hung up. I sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about families and patterns and the roles we accept until we don't. I thought about every birthday card I'd signed from all of us while being the only one who remembered. Every gift I'd bought that became, "We got you this." Every crisis I'd solved quietly while Jake got credit for showing up. The next morning came too soon. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the morning in my pajamas, drinking coffee and ignoring my phone. Around noon, hunger finally drove me to get dressed. I was debating between Thai food and pizza when my doorbell rang. It was my Aunt Christine, my father's sister. She lived across town, and we saw each other mainly at holidays, where she usually observed family dynamics with the detached interest of an anthropologist. She stood on my doorstep, holding a bakery box and wearing a knowing smile. "Heard you caused quite a stir last night," she said, without preamble. "Brought coffee cake. The good kind, with the crumb topping you pretend not to love." I let her in, too surprised to do anything else. She made herself at home in my kitchen, putting on coffee and slicing the cake like she'd been here 100 times instead of twice. "Your mother called me at 6 this morning," she said, handing me a plate. "Hysterical. Apparently, you've lost your mind and destroyed the family." I told her it was about damn time. I nearly choked on my coffee cake. "What?" Christine settled across from me, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Sarah, I've watched your family dynamic for years. Watched you pay for things you couldn't afford while Jake blew through money like water. Watched you show up early and stay late while being treated like the help. Watched your parents enable it all because it's easier than addressing their golden child's failures. I didn't know anyone noticed." "Oh, honey, everyone notices. We just don't say anything because your parents have made it clear that pointing out the obvious isn't welcome. But last night?" She smiled. "Last night you finally pointed it out in a way they couldn't ignore. Good for you. We talked for hours." Christine filled in pieces of family history I'd been too young to remember or too conditioned to see. How Jake's entitlement went back to childhood, enabled by parents who found it easier to give in than set boundaries. How my grandmother had seen it happening and tried to intervene, only to be shut out for being negative. How the family pattern of scapegoating the responsible one went back generations. "Your mother did it to your father's brother," Christine said, "took advantage of his generosity until he moved to Portland and cut contact. They still call him selfish for protecting himself." As she was leaving, she hugged me tight. "Don't let them guilt you back into the same patterns, Sarah. They'll try. They'll use every weapon in their arsenal: family loyalty, guilt, obligation, even love. But love isn't supposed to come with a price tag." The next few weeks were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. My mother cycled through tactics like she was working from a playbook. First came the cold shoulder, pointed silence, designed to make me crack and apologize. When that didn't work, she moved to public shaming, posting passive-aggressive memes on Facebook about ungrateful children and family disappointment. Then came the flying monkeys, relatives and family friends, recruited to deliver messages. "Your mother's heartbroken. Your brother's engagement is in jeopardy. Don't you think you've made your point?" I responded to each with the same calm message. "I'm taking some time to reassess my relationships. I hope everyone is well." Jake tried a different approach, showing up at my office one afternoon. Security called up to announce him, and I could have refused, but I was curious what tactic he'd prepared. He looked rough, unshaven, and wearing wrinkled clothes, the image of a man in crisis. "We need to talk," he said as soon as he entered my office. Madison left me. I gestured to a chair, but didn't offer sympathy. He sat heavily, running his hands through his hair in a gesture probably meant to evoke pity. Her father made her choose. Said if she stayed with me, he'd cut her off. No wedding funding, no trust fund, nothing. And she chose the money. Said I wasn't worth the drama. I waited, knowing there was more coming. "This is your fault," he said, but it lacked conviction. "If you'd just paid the bill like always, none of this would have happened. I'd be getting married next spring. Instead, I'm single, humiliated, And everyone knows it's because my own sister wouldn't support me. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Jake, do you even hear yourself? You're upset because your fiancé only wanted you for what you could provide, which was actually what I was providing. You're angry because when the flow of money stopped, so did her interest. And somehow, that's my fault? His face flushed. You don't understand. You've never had someone like Madison. You don't know what it's like to lose that. You're right. I've never had someone like Madison, someone who'd put me at a separate table while taking credit for my work. Someone who'd demean me while spending my money. If that's what I'm missing, I'm okay with it. He left without achieving whatever he'd come for, shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched from my window as he walked to his car, an expensive SUV I now suspected I'd indirectly paid for, and felt nothing but tired. The turning point came 3 weeks after the party. My phone rang early on a Saturday morning. Mom calling at this hour meant drama or disaster, possibly both. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sarah! Her voice was different, smaller, missing its usual commanding tone. I need your help. My stomach clenched. What's wrong? It's your father. He had a mild heart episode last night. He's okay, she rushed to add. But we're at the hospital, and I forgot his insurance card and the medications list, and I don't know what to do. The old Sarah would have been in the car already, racing to save the day. The new Sarah took a breath. Where's Jake? There was a pause. He's not answering his phone. You know how he is about hospitals. Actually, I didn't know that, because I'd never noticed Jake avoiding difficult situations before. Probably because I'd always stepped in before anyone had to ask him, send me the hospital information, I'll handle the insurance. But Mom, we're going to talk about some things when Dad's better. She agreed immediately, too scared to negotiate. I spent the day at the hospital, coordinating with doctors, handling paperwork, being the responsible daughter I'd always been. But this time, I was choosing it rather than assuming it was required. Dad was indeed fine. A warning rather than a catastrophe. As he dozed in his hospital bed, my mother and I sat in uncomfortable chairs, the fluorescent lights making everything look harsh and too real. I owe you an apology, she said suddenly. Maybe more than one. I waited. Christine came to see me last week. We had words. She took a shaky breath. She said some things I didn't want to hear, about how we've treated you, about how we've let Jake treat you, about how unfair it's all been. And I told her to mind her own business. She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. But then Madison's father called Robert. Did you know he recorded his conversation with you? He played it for Robert. Hearing you say those things, about being the family ATM, about funding dreams while being pushed aside, it was different hearing it from outside. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it. I don't know how it got so bad, Sarah. You were always so capable, so strong. Jake needed more help, more attention. Somewhere along the way, we started seeing your strength as permission to take advantage. That's on us, on me. We sat in silence for a while, holding hands in the harsh hospital light. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Change doesn't happen overnight, especially in families where patterns run decades deep. But acknowledgement? That's where it begins. Jake never apologized, not really, but he got a job, a real one with regular hours and a steady paycheck. He moved to a smaller apartment, sold the SUV for something practical. Without Madison's expensive tastes and my unknowing subsidies, he had to learn budgeting at 34. Last I heard, he was dating a teacher who made him split dinner checks and didn't care about Instagram. My relationship with my parents slowly rebuilt on new terms. Boundaries were set, respected, occasionally tested, then reinforced. I helped them not because I had to, or because they expected it, but because I chose to. The difference was everything. Family dinners became less frequent but more genuine. The conversations went deeper than weather and work gossip. We started seeing each other as people rather than roles. I kept the champagne bottle from that night, the one I'd bought for Jake and Madison but never gave them. It sits on my bookshelf, unopened, a reminder that sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it comes wrapped in consequences. 6 months after the engagement party, I treated myself to a vacation. A real one. Not a long weekend squeezed between work obligations. I went to Italy alone, spent 10 days wandering through museums and markets, eating gelato for breakfast because no one could tell me not to. I posted exactly 0 pictures on social media, saved every memory for myself. On my last night in Rome, I sat at a small cafe, watching the sun set over ancient buildings. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. A photo of the family at Jake's birthday dinner. Having fun but missing you, she'd written. And for the first time, I believed she meant it. I raised my wine glass to myself, to the woman who'd finally learned the difference between being needed and being used, between helping and enabling, between family and obligation. The wine tasted like freedom, like possibility, like a future where I sat at my own table, one I'd chosen, one where I belonged. Looking back now, I realize that night at the Sterling Room wasn't about a seating arrangement or a restaurant bill. It was about recognition, not just from them, but from myself. Recognition that I deserved a place at the table I'd spent years setting, serving, and paying for. Recognition that love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself to fit into whatever corner they've designated for you. The seating chart of our lives isn't fixed. We can refuse the auxiliary table, walk away from arrangements that diminish us, choose our own place. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is show them who you really are, even if it means they have to adjust their carefully constructed narrative. I still see my family regularly now, but on different terms. Jake and I have found a tentative peace, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. My parents have learned to ask rather than assume, to appreciate rather than expect. And me? I've learned that the best seat in the house is the one you choose for yourself, surrounded by people who see your worth without needing to calculate your value. The weeks following my father's hospital stay became a strange new chapter in our family story. He recovered well, but something had shifted in those sterile hospital corridors. Maybe it was the vulnerability of seeing him in a hospital gown, suddenly mortal and fragile. Maybe it was my mother's trembling hands as she filled out forms she'd never paid attention to before. Or maybe it was Jake's absence during those critical first hours, his phone going straight to voicemail while I handled everything from insurance forms to medication schedules. During Dad's recovery at home, I visited twice a week, bringing groceries and helping with appointments. But unlike before, I set clear boundaries. I came on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, from 6 to 8. Not on demand, not whenever they called, but on a schedule that worked for me. The first time my mother called on a Saturday, asking if I could run to the pharmacy, I gently reminded her that Jake lived closer and had weekends free. There was silence on the other end before she said, "You're right. I'll call him." It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. She'd actually heard me, considered my point, and adjusted her behavior accordingly. Jake, Jake, for his part, actually showed up, though he complained about the traffic the entire time according to Dad's amused retelling. 3 months after the engagement party disaster, I received an unexpected invitation in the mail. Not a text or a casual phone call, but an actual invitation on cream cardstock. Lunch with Christine was written in elegant script, with a date, time, and location at her favorite bistro. I smiled at the formality of it, so different from my family's usual assumption that I'd show up wherever and whenever needed. Christine was already seated when I arrived, looking perfectly put together in a coral blazer that made her silver hair shine. She stood to hug me, then gestured to a gift bag on the table. "A belated birthday present," she said with a knowing smile. Since I heard your actual birthday was somewhat overlooked in the chaos, she was right. My birthday had fallen 2 weeks after the engagement party, and while my parents had sent a card and Jake had managed a text, it had been notably subdued compared to previous years when I would have organized my own celebration and probably paid for it too. Inside the bag was a leather journal, buttery soft and expensive, the kind of thing I'd never buy for myself. "For writing your own story," Christine said. "Not the one they assigned you, but the one you choose." Over salmon salads and white wine, she shared more family history, filling in gaps I hadn't even known existed. She told me about my grandmother, a woman who'd raised 6 children while running a small business, only to be criticized for not being maternal enough. About my grandfather, who'd worked 3 jobs to support the family, but was remembered mainly for being absent. The patterns, it seemed, went back generations. This tendency to take the strongest family members for granted, while coddling the ones who struggled. You broke the cycle, Christine said, raising her glass. It might not feel like it now, with all the upheaval, but you did something important. You showed them that kindness and reliability aren't invitations for exploitation. As spring arrived in Denver, bringing with it the promise of renewal, I found myself in therapy for the first time in my life. Dr. Martinez was a soft-spoken woman who specialized in family dynamics, and our weekly sessions became a safe space to unpack decades of conditioning. Tell me about the first time you remember feeling responsible for your family's happiness, she asked during one session. I thought back, surprised when a memory surfaced from when I was 8 years old. Jake had been 5, and he'd broken Mom's favorite vase while playing indoor baseball, despite being told not to. I'd watched him cry, seen my mother's face crumple at the sight of her grandmother's heirloom in pieces, and I'd stepped forward to claim responsibility. I said I'd knocked it over while dusting, trying to help. My mother had sighed and said she appreciated my trying to help, but I needed to be more careful. Jake had stopped crying immediately, shot me a grateful look, and never mentioned it again. So from 8 years old, you were protecting others from the consequences of their actions, Dr. Martinez observed, and being blamed for things that weren't your fault. That's a heavy burden for a child to carry. Through these sessions, I began to understand how my role as the family stabilizer hadn't been assigned overnight. It had been built through thousands of small moments, each one reinforcing the message that my needs were secondary to keeping the peace, maintaining the status quo, ensuring everyone else's comfort. I also started dating again, something I'd put on hold for years, always too busy managing family crises to invest in my own romantic life. Thomas was a software engineer I met at a coffee shop, of all places. He'd accidentally taken my order, a complex latte with multiple modifications, and had been so mortified when he realized his mistake that he'd insisted on buying my correct drink when it came up. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. He was funny in a quiet way, with a dry wit that caught me off guard. He had his own complicated family history, parents who'd divorced when he was 12, a younger sister he was close to, and an older brother who'd struggled with addiction. But what struck me most was how he'd learned to love his family without losing himself in their drama. I have dinner with my mom every other Sunday, he told me on our third date. I help my brother when he asks and when I'm able. But I don't sacrifice my own life to manage theirs. It took me years to learn that boundary. Eh? Dating Thomas showed me what it felt like to be seen as a whole person rather than a support system. He remembered things I mentioned in passing, asked about my day with genuine interest, and never once assumed I'd handle logistics or foot the bill. When we went out, we alternated paying or split checks. When we cooked together, we shared the work. It was such a foreign concept, this idea of genuine partnership, that I found myself crying in my car after our 5th date, overwhelmed by the realization of how little I'd expected for myself in relationships. 6 months after the engagement party, spring had fully arrived in Denver. The cherry blossoms in Washington Park were in full bloom, and I'd started taking morning walks before work, something I'd never had time for when I was constantly on call for family emergencies. It was on one of these walks that my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Sarah? The voice was familiar but uncertain. This is Madison. I stopped walking, finding a bench to sit on. This was unexpected. Madison, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, she said quickly, but I wanted to apologize. Actually apologize. Not that passive-aggressive thing I did at the party. I waited, curious despite myself. I've been in therapy, she continued, since the breakup, and we've talked a lot about that night, about how I treated you. I was horrible. Beyond horrible. I was cruel and dismissive, and I participated in something really ugly. The apology continued for several minutes, and I could hear the genuine remorse in her voice. She told me about growing up as the only child of successful parents, always feeling like she had to be perfect, always competing for attention and validation. She said she'd seen in Jake someone she could control, someone who would let her be the star, and she'd been threatened by my competence and independence. I'm not excusing it, she said firmly. There's no excuse for how I treated you, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. What we did to you, what I did, and I'm sorry. I thanked her for calling and meant it. Not because I forgave her, that would take time if it came at all, but because her apology confirmed what I'd suspected. The problem had never been me. It had been a toxic dynamic that everyone participated in, each for their own reasons. Later that same week, Jake showed up at my apartment. It was the first time he'd been there since helping me move in 5 years earlier, and he looked uncomfortable standing in my doorway, hands shoved in his pockets. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Really talk, not fight or blame or whatever we've been doing." I let him in, offered him coffee, which he accepted. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd drunk that champagne alone months earlier, and for the first time in years, really looked at each other. "I've been seeing someone," he said finally. "Her name's Emma. She's a teacher, like Mom mentioned. But she's also in recovery, from growing up with an alcoholic parent who everyone enabled." I raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. "She's called me out on so much," Jake continued. "The first he said, so I let you, good grade, do you and Mom, Jake looked, I asked, with each being you, he told Jake's, he started, the first time I met her, she hugged me and whispered, 'Thank you for not giving up on him entirely. He's doing the work.' My relationship with Thomas deepened as well. He met my parents at a neutral restaurant, his choice, where he witnessed firsthand the dynamics I'd described. My mother's subtle attempts to get me to handle the check just this once since I knew what everyone liked. My father's jokes about how Sarah always takes care of everything. Jake's arrival 20 minutes late with a breezy apology. But this time, I didn't jump to smooth things over. When the check came, Thomas suggested we split it evenly 4 ways. When my mother protested that Jake had ordered less, Thomas smiled and said, "Then he can calculate his portion and Venmo someone." When they looked at me expectantly, I was examining the dessert menu, apparently oblivious to the financial logistics unfolding. Later, in the car, Thomas took my hand. "That was hard to watch," he said. "How automatic it is for them to look to you to solve everything." "Old habits," I said, "but I'm learning new ones." A year after the engagement party, almost to the day, I hosted my first family dinner. I'd moved to a larger apartment, one with a dining room and a kitchen meant for more than microwaving leftovers. I'd debated the invitation for weeks, discussing it with Dr. Martinez, with Thomas, with myself during those morning walks. Finally, I sent a group text. "Family dinner at my place. October 15th, 6 p.m. Please RSVP by the 10th so I can plan accordingly. Bring yourselves, nothing else needed." The responses were immediate and revealing. Mom offered to bring 3 dishes and help cook. Dad asked if I needed him to pick anything up. Jake asked what he should bring to drink. Old patterns trying to reassert themselves. But this time, I was ready. "Thank you, but I've got everything covered," I responded. "Just bring yourselves." The night of the dinner, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't expected. I'd cooked all day, preparing dishes I enjoyed rather than catering to everyone's specific preferences. I'd set the table with my good dishes, bought fresh flowers, even splurged on wine I actually liked rather than whatever was on sale. Thomas offered to be there, but I decided this was something I needed to do alone. Stand on my own ground, as myself, with my family. They arrived together, prompt for once, looking slightly uncomfortable at being guests rather than hosts. I watched them take in my space, really see it for perhaps the first time. The art on the walls that reflected my taste, the books that showed my interests, the life I'd built that had nothing to do with them but could include them if we could find a new way forward. Dinner was awkward at first. Without the usual dynamics, no one seemed sure how to act. But slowly, helped by wine and good food, we found a rhythm. Jake told a genuinely funny story about a disaster at his new job. Mom talked about possibly retiring early, finally admitting the boutique work was harder than she'd let on. Dad discovered we both loved the same obscure documentary series. For the first time in my memory, we had a family dinner where I wasn't managing anyone's emotions, mediating between personalities, or handling logistics beyond normal hosting duties. I was just present, as myself, and that was enough. As they were leaving, my mother lingered at the door. "This was lovely, Sarah. Really lovely. Thank you for having us." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "I know we have a long way to go. I know forgiveness isn't automatic or required. But I want you to know we're trying. I'm trying. I hugged her, feeling her surprise at the gesture. We'd never been particularly physically affectionate, another casualty of our dynamic. I know, Mom. I'm trying too. 3 years have passed since that night at the Sterling Room. 3 years of therapy, boundaries, difficult conversations, and slow rebuilding. Not everything is perfect. There are still moments when old patterns try to resurface, when Jake assumes I'll handle something, or when my parents forget to consider my schedule before making plans. But the difference is awareness. We see it now. All of us. The assumptions, the taking for granted, the established roles that served no one well. And we course correct, sometimes clumsily, but with genuine effort. Jake married Emma last spring in a small ceremony at a city park. I was a bridesmaid, a real one this time, included in planning and photos, and seated at the main table without question. He paid for his own wedding, every penny, and took pride in doing so. During his speech, he thanked his family for their support and looked directly at me when he said, especially my sister Sarah, who taught me that love isn't measured in what someone will do for you, but in how you show up for each other. My parents have learned to ask rather than assume, to appreciate rather than expect. They call before visiting, make plans that consider everyone's schedules, and have even started splitting checks without drama. It's not perfect, but it's progress. And me? I'm engaged to Thomas now, planning a wedding that reflects us both, where everyone will sit at tables they've chosen and bills will be discussed beforehand. I still help my family, but on my terms, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. I've learned that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, that being needed isn't the same as being valued, and that the best relationships are those where everyone gives and receives in equal measure. That night, at the Sterling Room, I thought I was just refusing to pay a bill, but what I was really doing was presenting them with a different kind of check, one for all the years of imbalance, all the taken for granted support, all the invisible labor of being the family safety net. It was a bill they're still paying, in small installments of respect and recognition and actual gratitude. Sometimes I drive past that restaurant, see the glowing windows of the private dining room, and remember the woman who sat alone at a corner table, finally seeing her. Worth wasn't determined by her usefulness. That table, the one meant to diminish me, became the platform for my liberation. And somewhere in Denver, there's a restaurant with a beautiful view and a small round table in the corner that witnessed a woman finally standing up, speaking out, and walking away. If walls could talk, that one would probably say it was about damn time. But more than that, it would tell the story of what came after. The rebuilding, the growth, the family that learned new ways to love each other. The woman who found her voice and used it not just to say no, but to say yes to herself, her worth, and her right to sit at any damn table she chooses. That's the real happy ending. Not the dramatic exit or the moment of vindication, but the quiet work of building something better from the ashes of what was. A family reformed not by obligation, but by choice. A woman who learned that the best seat in the house isn't the one others assign you, but the one you claim for yourself. Surrounded by people who see you, value you, and never, ever seat you by the trash. As I write this, sitting in my sun-filled home office on a quiet Sunday morning, I can hardly recognize the woman I was 5 years ago. That's Sarah, the one who wore exhaustion like a badge of honor and measured her worth in others' convenience. Dionysius feels like a character from someone else's story. But she was me, and I honor her journey even as I celebrate growing beyond her limitations. Thomas is in the kitchen making breakfast, the sound of eggs sizzling and coffee brewing a comfortable soundtrack to my morning. We take turns cooking on weekends, a simple equality that still sometimes catches me off guard with its fairness. Later today, we're meeting Jake and Emma at the farmer's market, a new tradition we've started where we actually enjoy each other's company rather than endure it. My phone sits silent on my desk, no longer the constant bearer of family emergencies and last-minute demands. When it does ring with family matters now, it's usually my mother sharing a funny story about her retirement hobby of watercolor painting, or Jake asking for recipe advice as he's become quite the home chef under Emma's patient guidance. The conversations are lighter now, freed from the weight of unspoken resentments and unfair expectations. I think about the women who might be reading this, recognizing themselves in my story, the reliable daughters, the responsible sisters, the family ATMs who fund dreams while their own are dismissed. To you, I want to say this. Your worth is not measured in your usefulness. Your value doesn't decrease when you say no. The love you deserve doesn't come with a price tag or a seating chart that places you by the door. It's not easy, this journey from enabler to equal. There will be tears, accusations, guilt trips designed by masters of manipulation. There will be moments when you question whether maintaining the peace would have been easier than disturbing it. But on the other side of that disruption is something precious. Relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Love that flows both ways rather than being siphoned in one direction. And a sense of self that isn't dependent on being everyone else's solution. The Sterling Room closed last year, unable to weather the economic changes that hit the restaurant industry. But sometimes I drive past the building, now being renovated into luxury condos, and smile at the poetry of it. The place where I was made to feel small is itself being transformed into something new. We're all capable of such transformation, of taking spaces and relationships that diminished us and rebuilding them into something that honors our worth. My story isn't unique. In therapy groups and online forums, in coffee shops and office break rooms, women share variations of the same experience. The taken for granted daughter, the overlooked sister, the family member whose strength is mistaken for permission to lean harder. But more and more of us are standing up, speaking out, refusing to pay bills both literal and metaphorical that aren't ours to carry. To those still sitting at auxiliary tables, still paying for parties where you're not welcome, still being told that your sensitivities are the problem rather than their cruelties, you deserve better. And better is possible, though it might require you to overturn a few tables to get there. The path from doormat to person is rocky, but every step is worth it. And to the families who might recognize themselves in my family's behavior, it's never too late to change. My parents and brother proved that. With effort, honesty, and humility, even the most entrenched dynamics can shift. But it requires seeing the person you've been taking for granted, really seeing them, and choosing to do better. As for me, I'm planning my wedding now, a joyful process that involves actual collaboration rather than me handling everything while others take credit. My family will be there, sitting together at tables chosen for celebration rather than hierarchy. Jake will speak as a groomsman, my parents will dance at the reception, and Aunt Christine will probably cry happy tears at how far we've all come. But more importantly, I'll be there as myself, not the family fixer, or the reliable daughter, or the sister who handles things. Just Sarah, claiming her place at the table of her own life, surrounded by people who see her worth without calculating her usefulness. And that corner table by the trash, it's where I learned the most valuable lesson of my life. Sometimes the best seat in the house is the one you leave behind.